Hello and welcome to a brand new Arseblog Arsecast right here on arseblog.com. How are you? Hope you're well. Thank you very much indeed, as always, for being here. If you're looking for a football fix, the Euros are starting today, Friday, of course. Kicking off tonight, a couple of Arsenal players involved. Kai Havertz and Kieran Tierney will probably be in action as Germany take on Scotland to kick off the tournament. And we will be bringing you plenty of coverage of the Euros on the main site, on the main podcast, but also we're going to have a lot of extra stuff for our Patreon members. So if you fancy joining up and getting podcasts galore on the Euros, you can do that at patreon.com/Arseblog. There's not much going on from an Arsenal perspective, of course. The only story this week is the fact that Benjamin Sesko has decided to turn down a move to the Premier League and to Arsenal to stay at RB Leipzig. Do we want to go over the ins and outs of a transfer that isn't going to happen? I don't think so. We've got all summer to do that, and we've got all summer, hopefully, to talk about the transfers that actually do happen. So today, we've got something a little bit extra special for you. It's always a pleasure to talk to former Arsenal players. And this is an interview that's been in the works for quite a while, but finally, we made it happen. Today, I am talking to Carl Jenkinson. He is back in the UK after spending a few years in Australia, playing in the A-League out there. So we chat about his time in Australia. We obviously talk about his move to Arsenal from Charlton at 19 years of age, some of the challenges he faced early on, learning from the likes of Bacary Sagna and Arsene Wenger and Steve Bould, his thoughts on former teammate Mikel Arteta, who of course is now the manager of the club, and lots more. And yes, we do chat about that famous clip involving Carl Jenkinson's dad. So it's all in here. It's a great conversation. Really hope you enjoy it. So this is me and Carl Jenkinson. Hello, Carl.
How you doing?
I'm good. It's good to talk to you. We've been trying to get this organised via Instagram DMs for a while. I slid into your DMs and finally we've made it happen.
Yeah, that's it. I mean, it's been a long time coming, really, hasn't it? We've been speaking about it for a while and just the timings of it all. But
sure,
now that I'm back in the UK, it's a lot easier.
You are back from a couple of years out in Australia, maybe 2 or 3 years out there. You were playing for Newcastle Jets. How was that experience for you? From a football perspective, and I guess as well from a life perspective, it's a different culture, different way of life, certainly different weather. As we're sitting here, I'm in Dublin, you're in London, I guess, or somewhere close to London. The summer hasn't arrived here yet. They don't have that problem over there.
No, very much so, yeah. Even they make me laugh out there. My mates, from over there, when it's 20 degrees, they're like talking about how cold it is. It's like, wow, you've had it nice your whole life. You don't even realise. But it was. I was there for 2.5 years in total in the end. So I played for Melbourne City first for 6 months, and then after that sort of loan period, then I signed for the Newcastle Jets for 2 years. So stayed in 2 fantastic places, quite different. Melbourne's very much a city, and they say it's kind of similar to like Europe in the sense of, there's a lot to do there, and they have 4 seasons of weather, which most places in Australia don't. It gets quite cold in the winter. So that was great. It was really heavy football because it was just after COVID. So we played a game literally every 3 days from the day that I arrived. I think I played nearly 30 games in sort of 3.5 months. Probably 3.5, maybe 4 months max. So it was a lot of football. It was very intense. And we played in the Asian Champions League over in Thailand. So that was a cool experience. But yeah, loads of football. I didn't have too much of an opportunity to actually get out and about and see much of Melbourne, in all honesty, because it was just, game after game, which was great in its own way. And then, after that, come home for a little while, and I suppose Australia was still calling in a way. Like I felt like I didn't actually have much of a life experience there because the football was so intense. I wanted to kind of have a bit more of a balance and actually have that experience. And Newcastle Jets come in for me, and I ended up going there, which was a bit more of a it's still a city, but it's a lot more. It's right on the beach. It's more laid back. So that was awesome, and it was very much like how us Brits would envisage living in Australia, if you know what I mean. Like the weather is super warm there. It's about 2 hours north of Sydney, so great weather. warmer than a Melbourne, and it was great. Yeah, it was one of the, I say to my mates, like, best thing I ever done, to be honest. You know, I feel I grew up so much out there. You know, I had to find my feet in terms of, just find my feet, really, learn it. I suppose when I was here, I often had my family all around me and so much help and stuff like that. And I went out there on my own. So you kind of, you know, learning how to deal with a lot of different stuff that maybe I didn't do before. So as a man, it was great for me as well. So I loved it. It was one of the best things I've ever done.
And as a football experience, you know, as somebody who's played from a young age in the Premier League, you play in the Champions League, you know, it's obviously different. The standard is different. But, you know, at a point in your career, was it, you know, as enjoyable as what you'd experienced before? Or is it just a different kind of experience?
Yeah, different kind of experience. Obviously, the standard and the level is different, but I don't want to discredit the A-League either, because they get a lot of good quality players there. Both players from overseas who are maybe towards the latter end of their career, who've maybe not as fit or whatever as they used to be, but still have quality. So you have quite a few players who go out there in that regard. And then Australia is becoming a pretty powerful nation in the sense of producing young players as well. Like a lot of, I mean, maybe you and a lot of people over here wouldn't notice it so much because you get players, you know, come and go all the time. But having been out there, you know, I would see quite regularly transfers of like the young Australian players going to big clubs over here. Like I think a couple of the goalkeepers have signed for like Premier League clubs. One of the real young talents out there has just signed for Bayern Munich not too long ago. So there was a guy called Kual, a young lad who signed for Newcastle, I think, last year. So they've got quite a decent conveyor belt of young players as well. So it's kind of a mix of both, you know. You have the really good youngsters who obviously look to push on and go on to bigger and better things. And then you do have, so-called senior players with obviously still have skill and talent in that regard, and they bring that to the league as well. So yeah, it was a different experience, but it was very enjoyable, and I loved it. I played loads of football. I think over 2.5 years, probably played about 60 games, lots of footy, and just enjoyed it, really.
Yeah. We'll come back to maybe what's going to happen next, but I want to go back, obviously, and talk about your career in sort of broad strokes, if we can. And obviously, everybody knows this. You know, the fact you're a former Arsenal player, but you were an Arsenal fan, growing up an Arsenal fan. And you came from Charlton, so I'm curious as to how that move came about, because you didn't play a lot for Charlton for the first team, but then you're being bought by Arsenal. I read the piece that you did with my podcast pal, James McNicholas in The Athletic a few months ago. And you talked a little bit about this, about how there were, you know, clubs looking at you, scouting you at the time. But I'm guessing, you know, as somebody, if I was in that situation, if I'm an Arsenal fan, I hear that Arsenal are looking at me and thinking about making a move for me. What was that like as something to deal with in the very early part of your career? Because that's kind of, everyone has different levels of football dreams, but to play for the club you support really is kind of the cornerstone, isn't it, of every young footballer's dreams?
Yeah, I mean, well, we might have to, there's so many sort of ways to go about responding to what you just said. I mean, I think, look, when it actually come around, the interest from the Premier League clubs and Arsenal, it happened so quickly. You're right. I think I played 10 odd games for Charlton. If that, it wasn't a large number of games. It wasn't over a period of time where I played a season or two and then these clubs were interested. Like, I sort of went into the first team at Charlton and played one game, played 2 games. Then, you know, I'm being told that these scouts are coming to watch me, and then more were coming to watch me. And then it was very quickly, it went from, I've just broke into the Charlton first team, you know, focusing on that, to, actually I'm playing for Charlton's first team regularly here and doing really well, to, you know, in the space of a couple of months, really, to like all these clubs want to sign me kind of thing. So yeah, that all just happened really, really quickly. And yeah, I suppose I was at Charlton first, just talking about Charlton a little bit. It was an amazing academy, and that's why I joined Charlton when I was really young. I had a couple more options locally, but Charlton were in the Premier League. They was known for bringing through young players, young talent. And it was obviously, as it often is, it was my parents' decision was like, let's do Charlton. I think it's a good fit for your son. And it was a great academy.
Yeah.
Steve Avery was the head of the academy there, and he's still the head of the academy there now. He's just very good at nurturing young players. And it was a great place for me to learn to play football. And, I don't know if that lent into... I was always one of the more... I was held in high regard in my age groups as I worked through that age groups. I was never the top. There was always sort of one or two who were sort of the golden boys as such. Like John Joe Shelby springs to mind when he turned up. A guy called Harry Pell when I was younger who was in that mould. But I was always held in quite high regard. So maybe other teams kind of knew about me and what I could do from earlier on. Because Charlton, we used to play all the big clubs all throughout our seasons when we was playing. So maybe that lent into it as well. When I did actually get into the first team, like a lot of scouts and teams probably knew about me as well. But yeah, it all happened so quickly. And looking back now, it was just a bit of a blur. And I think I told James a story of like when I found out Arsenal were one of the clubs interested. It was after a game that we had played and I think we had lost. And I didn't think I had my best game. And I sat down with my dad and he said, he used to try and keep the pressure off me a little bit and didn't tell me too much, but maybe he couldn't help himself telling me that Arsenal were there. And he said, but just so you know, son, Arsenal were there tonight. Steve Rowley was there. Yeah. And I sort of took a deep breath. And I remember I got upset because I didn't think I had played that well. And I was like, no way. I said, I've played better games before. Why did he have to come to this one? And then my dad said to me, don't worry, son. He said, like, he loved you. He's coming and watching next week. And, just keep doing what you're doing. And then that was that. And sort of it intensified from that point. And, it was something that, as often transfers do, sort of bubble in the background. And it sort of kept under wraps. And, I couldn't tell my mates for quite a while that, because I'm a gooner, but a lot of my mates are too.
Sure.
So, imagine kind of knowing what's on the horizon for you and sort of having to keep your mouth shut. That was a bit difficult in itself. But, I do remember going to our like local pub sometime further down the line when it was pretty much done and dusted and telling my two best mates from school, like, lads, just thought I should let you know, like, I'm signing for Arsenal.
Oh, my God.
You can imagine their reaction and sort of how that was amongst us three best mates. Just thinking back, good times.
What was the? I mean, did you talk to Arsene Wenger? Was it Steve Rowley who sort of laid things out? Did you get an idea of what? I don't want to say what your role was going to be because you were still young at that point, right? You're still quite young, signing for Arsenal. 18 or 19, was it? Maybe 19.
19. Yeah.
So when you've got someone like Bacary Sagna in the squad and in the team, when it's laid out to you about what lies ahead for you and what kind of a role they envisage for you in the squad and in the team, how did that pan out?
I wasn't that bothered what it looked like, to be honest. But in the same sense, I was at an age where I wanted to at least be like an understudy. I wasn't expecting to go Arsenal and play. Like, I knew I would be developed and, probably be second choice or, I didn't really ask, where I'd sit in that pecking order. I think the way the amount of clubs that were interested and a lot of the other clubs were interested in taking me as someone who was, going to be in and around it and going to play some games. I think that was kind of just how it felt like it was going to be at Arsenal. Obviously, you have to go in and prove yourself, and to even. I do remember Dick Law at the time. He sort of said, "Well, we're not sure what changing room you're going to go into when you sign, whether it's going to be the first team one or the reserve team one as of yet." So I went in for pre-season. Unfortunately, straight away you go away on a pre-season tour. And I went away on a pre-season tour, turned up, in the best shape of my life and went away on this tour and done well. And And yeah, I was in the first team changing room, so it was like I was there from the start with the first team, and so yeah, that's how it panned out really. But yeah, interesting you say that. I do remember there being a little period of like, how is it going to look for me? But I always felt they were signing me as a first team player, and now I was going to be in and around the first team from the get-go really. But again, like I said, I kind of had to, even coming through the door right at the start, I had to, hit the ground running. And yeah, I think, Arsene was happy with what he saw, and then, I was in the fold straight away.
What was the first thing that struck you when you came from Charlton to Arsenal, to an Arsenal team that obviously was having a few issues that summer, but, being in that dressing room, playing with some of those players, did you immediately think, okay, this is really a different level? It was
to be honest, it was a hard adjustment just for me personally, because I've always been so dedicated to football and being the best footballer I can be. I had to go in there and remember it was now my job. Like, it wasn't in the sense of, at first when I walk in there, I'm like, I've signed for Arsenal here, and I'm seeing players who, I've watched last season, from the stands, and I'm like, this is, 6 months before that moment, that would have been, that wasn't something I would have even thought was achievable.
Sure.
So I had to very quickly just make sure I was in a headspace where, I'm here because I want to be successful and I want to be the best footballer I can be in this environment. And that entailed for me kind of almost forgetting that the other lads and the boys who I was playing with were sort of players that I've looked up to and admired and idolised for many years. They're now my teammates. I'm now, playing with them. I'm also competing against other players because I want to play. And I had to make that adjustment very quickly. That was something that I remembered in my mind. And I did, because ultimately I wanted to do well. It wasn't enough to be there. I wanted to do well there. But yeah, it was, of course, the things that I remember that being so different was the magnitude of the club in every single way, going into the training facilities and how much staff there were, the amount of media duties you have to do. The first thing that we went, we were actually quite protected in that sense. It was all on one day, and you would have like so that was never overwhelming, to be honest, but it was just something that I never really done at Charlton. But we went straight away on a tour to Asia, and I mean, you would understand sort of the level of the fan base out there and how sort of crazy they go for Arsenal and for the players and stuff. So
the passion, it's amazing, isn't it?
Is the word. And it was crazy. We'd be on a bus and we'd have like 50 mopeds with like 2-3 people sat on them all with their camera phones, just like following us to and from training. And I was just like, this is a different world, completely different world. And it just was like the magnitude of the club in every single way was completely different. And then you come to the players. Obviously, the standard was just top level, really, and in a different way in terms of a lot of the passing drills and stuff. I had my strengths as a player. Physically, I was in a very good place. That was one of the reasons the club signed me. I think my physical stats were like up there with the best in Europe. I remember Steve Rowley telling my dad that, I had such a huge capacity to get forward, get back, get forward, get back, which is what you need to be able to do as a fullback these days. I had a real good engine. So I had my own attributes, but then you put that into an Arsenal team who are boys are very technical, very skillful, and that probably, that wasn't particularly my skill set. I can pass a ball, I can cross a ball, I have my own strengths in that field. But when we're doing rondos and we're doing ball drills, around the mannequins and stuff that we used to do, it was a different sort of skill set that, I had to improve on, basically. I had to get better at that sort of stuff, because them boys were so good. Their first touch, the way they passed the ball, the weight of pass, like all of these things were just on a different level. So, I was quite raw when I first signed in that sense. But
That's part of the challenge, though, isn't it? You know, to sort of improve and to develop as a player. That's what they say about, you know, training with great players, is that you up your game or you can learn a lot from these guys.
That's it, yeah. And that was the mentality I took into it. I just always wanted to get better every day, would do everything I could to get better every day and try and get to that level. And you learn a lot of them, that level of players. Like, I was behind Bacary Sagna for quite a few years, and you know, to learn from someone like him was just great. You know, he's one of the best, in my book, he's one of the best right backs that there's been in the Premier League. He was fantastic. He could do everything, and he was a cracking guy as well. Always arm around the shoulder, like trying to help and stuff. And I always remember moments like when I broke into the team at the start of my second season, I believe it was. I had a run of games in the team and done really well, and I got called up to England and stuff. And I remember Bacary coming out and saying like some really nice things about me in the media about, you know, X, Y, Z, and you know that, yeah, just singing my praise. And I thought, oh, you're just a classy guy. Do you know what I mean? You're just, you know, he was just always willing to help, and you know, I suppose that you remember them things, and you want to be that kind of guy yourself. Now that I'm around that age,
yeah.
For other players as well, because someone like him was a great player to play with and alongside, and sort of be an understudy to for a period of time.
What was it like working with Arsene, and was it Steve Bould who was the assistant at the point? You know, obviously a brilliant defender. You know, in his time at Arsenal, and somebody who I don't know if he was responsible for a lot of the defensive coaching, but you know, you when you hear people talk about Arsene Wenger, there's a lot of, well, you know, he lets the players express themselves, and you know, in terms of coaching, you know, there's different ways of doing it. You know, there's people, perhaps, you know, we might come to a certain former teammate of yours who seems to be very precise in what he wants from his players, and other players who are, or managers rather, who are very exacting, whereas Arsene felt a little more kind of free form, if you like. So, you know, as a young player at that age, what's that combination like? Let's say working with Steve Bould, working with Arsene Wenger, and you know, did they influence your game or your attributes in different ways? Well,
the boss was the way, you know, he spoke about football, and the way he wanted football played was very much about us. It was very much about fluid, free-flowing football. You know, I always remember the phrase he used to say about, you know, do what the game demands, and, you know, not what you want to do what the game demands in that moment. You know, if there's a better pass on, play that pass. And he used to look at football in such a unique way, but such a refreshing way, that every player who played for him used to just love playing for him, because you just played a certain way, which is how you used to want to play when you was younger and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So you had that side of it, which was, you know, Arsene's philosophy, and then, you know, I had Pat Rice when I first come in, and then you have Steve Bould, and we would oftentimes do more defensive drills with them, and they're often like one-on-one conversations about the defensive aspects of different stuff, and I did learn a lot from them too. Just regards to like positioning and, you know, 1v1 defending and that kind of stuff. So I actually remember that second season at the start, we didn't concede a goal for quite a few games. And
so I remember that, yeah.
The Bould he got, you know, was getting a lot of love from the fans and stuff, and rightly so, because you know, he played a big part in that as well. And I really enjoyed it. Obviously, Arsene speaks for itself. You know, I can't speak highly enough of Arsene, as most people can't. But also people like Pat Rice and Steve Bould, I learned a lot from. You know, unbelievable defenders, and you know, what an environment to walk into as a young player, to be able to learn from them type of guys. Yeah.
So you've arrived at the club, and look, there's a lot going on that summer. The summer of 2011, there was the situations with Cesc and Samir Nasri. There wasn't much going on in terms of incoming business. You came in, Alex Oxlade-Chamberlain came in, and it all sort of came to a head, if you like, with that infamous game at Old Trafford. Can you remember what the mood was like after that game? And then obviously the club reacted in a fairly significant way in the transfer window, because Mikel Arteta came in, Per Mertesacker came in, Ben Ayoun, Park, and there was one more as well. Andre Santos, I think it was, who came in as well. So in the space of a couple of days after that big defeat at Old Trafford, there were 5 new players in the squad. Did it feel like they were getting things in order a bit? And what was that like to deal with at such an early stage in your career?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think the club obviously felt at that time it was necessary, and the players that they brought in made a big difference. So, I can't speak too much about that. That was obviously people way above me who were making them decisions. But yeah, I can speak about the game, and the game was very painful and still is painful to these days. It's my lowest moment memory in football. And it's just I don't really know what to say, Andrew. When I look back at it, it was still a bit of a blur to this day. It still hurts, It's my lowest moment in football, and obviously the sort of the disappointment, the pain as a team, as an individual that you feel when results like that occur in games of that magnitude is, it lives with you for a long time, Sure. So. Yeah, probably struggle to talk about it a bit, really. It's not a nice conversation for myself because it was such a disappointing day and such a sad day. You feel like you let a lot of people down, again, collectively and individually. But yeah, I had to, it really hurt at the time. And like I said, it still is a very bad memory, but it was something I had to put to bed very quickly because at that moment it was either sink or swim.
Sure.
And I remember after that game just thinking this is not how the story is sort of going to end. You know what I mean? I need to, just on a personal level, you just think, oh, fuck, I need to get better. It's quite simple, I need to get better. I need to do what I need to do to improve and to, ultimately I wanted to make it at Arsenal. And that was a very, tough start for me, and everything that comes with it. In the media and stuff like that for a young boy is quite hard to deal with too. Yeah. But yeah, it was a sink or swim moment. And I like to think off the back of that, over the years that followed, I proved myself capable. And, it maybe wasn't as prolonged as I would have liked, but, I played a lot of good football in an Arsenal shirt and I had some cracking games. And so, yeah, I'm actually, considering how much of a tough start that was for me, I do look back and think, I'm actually quite proud that I've, a lot of people, results like that or moments like that, they don't see, you cannot get seen again. And so I'm quite proud of how I responded to that, probably.
It wasn't too long after that, in fairness, that you were front and centre with Jack Wilshere, Aaron Ramsey, Kieran Gibbs, Alex Oxlade-Chamberlain, who you mentioned as well, as this sort of British core that the club were going to build around. And, as an idea, it made sense at the time for various reasons. It didn't quite maybe work out the way everyone would have wanted, but it did show the promise and the potential that was there. And it was something, I think, as well from a fan perspective, having gone through some difficult moments and to sort of reach a low ebb like that, that game at Old Trafford was a low ebb for everybody, I think. And then to sort of steady the ship and turn it around a bit and sort of head back towards what you expect from Arsenal. At that time, you guys represented something I think that fans could really get behind.
Yeah, I think... I think you're right, and it felt like that at the time. And I think that group of players as a whole was a very talented group of players, and I think the fans as well. As us, it was great to be a part of that. Like I loved them lads, and still do. Great lads, great memories with them, and super talented players. Obviously, our careers have all gone in different directions. Some have gone pushed onto the very top, and others maybe not as much, but that's football, isn't it? Not everyone goes, and I don't know, sometimes I think people talk about that British core like we was all going to go and, win the World Cup kind of thing. Like it doesn't really work like that, I think, I think at the time it was a great thing to be a part of, and the future was bright for all of us players within that group at the time. And look, like I said, some more than others have gone on to achieve, amazing things. And, you know, some of us maybe not quite fulfilled what was hoped at that time. But like I said, that's football. And, yeah, I have fond memories of playing with them boys. A really, really good group of lads and a lot of good shared memories with them on and off the pitch.
Sure. Can we talk a little bit about your injuries? And you said things didn't go necessarily the way you would have wanted, or, you know, for all of you in various ways, there were challenges that you faced along your career, which is part and parcel of football, as we know. And, you know, Jack, for example, an amazing talent. You know, that clip doing the round the other day from his game at Soccer Aid, and you know, you're thinking. I
was there. I watched the game. My girlfriend is one of the producers on the show, so I went. And yeah, I remember thinking at that moment, and then they showed the highlight. They showed it again on the screen straight after. I was like, "That's just Jack to a T, isn't it?" Just
unbelievable.
Oozes class.
Still got it, you know. But you know, you went on loan a couple of times. You went to West Ham a couple of times, Birmingham as well. You had a big injury though. You had your ACL injury, which I think you said to James in the piece for The Athletic that afterwards you didn't necessarily feel like you ever quite came back to your best after that. Was that, you know, physically? Was it mentally? You know, how did that injury impact you and your ability to play at the level that you wanted? Because you just said a few minutes ago that your physical capacity was something that was, you know, maybe your best strength, if you like. Did you feel yourself impeded after the injury? Was it a question of just not being as strong as you thought, or as able to run, or was there maybe you know, some players I think have a psychological issue after they have that injury where it doesn't, you know, they don't necessarily feel as confident after sustaining and after doing all that work to come back?
Yeah, no, it was never a mental thing for me. There was never a fear of doing it again or hurting myself. You know, I had full faith in the work that had been done on the knee, and I've never, it was never a thing for me. I know some players do have that side of it, and I do understand it. But yeah, I was never worried about going into a tackle or any of that sort of stuff. It was more just, I just lost. It's just the easiest way to put it. I just lost a bit of a spring in my step, really. When I running before, for me, was effortless, and I used to stride, and I used to almost just feel like I was running on clouds at times. It was just the most effortless thing for me. When I was in my stride, I was off. And yeah, just after that, obviously to this day, I can still run absolutely fine and, you know, physically in a good place. But you have surgeries, especially like an ACL, but, you know, people who have different surgeries, ankles and stuff, they take an edge off you generally. There's probably a few, but not many. You can come back to exactly the same level and better. I'm sure there are absolutely examples, but for the most part, it does. It takes an edge off you, and you know, you maybe lose a yard of pace. You know, I sit here now and say, you know, I played last year and I'm still playing in teams where I can gauge myself against other players. I'm still quick. I'm still in the top probably quarter of the team I was at last year in terms of speed, top speed. But I used to be first or second. So, and that was at the top level. So that's just the difference, you know. I mean, just took an edge off me in that sense. I just wasn't as quick. I didn't have that spring in my step like I used to. So, you know, it's not that deep in terms of, you know, I sit here now and I'm lucky enough and that I can still play football, you know, and all right, it's not to the same level as I used to be able to, but my body's good and I can still sit here and still play football. So I don't get too caught up on stuff like that. And I almost don't like to talk about it because I think, yeah, that happened and maybe knocked me down a peg, but so what? I can still play football. I'm still lucky enough to be able to play football as a job. Yeah. And get up and train and go and play with my teammates every day. And, you know, all right, it's not at the top level anymore, but for me, that's okay. You know what I mean? If I could go back in time and not do it, well,
sure,
of course I would. But yeah, I I don't like to look at it and think, with too much of a negative light, because these things happen in football, and players have far worse problems than I've had, and worse injuries that have maybe stopped them playing completely.
Yeah.
So I never want to be someone who sits here and gets all, to that. Life goes on.
Sure.
You know what I mean?
That's a good outlook. I mean, there is, with any career, but I think especially in football, there are, things, if they go your way, your career could go one way. And if they don't, it might happen differently for you. Like, did you get injured in your first game on loan at Birmingham? Was it your first game?
Yeah. That was my first one. Yeah, I dislocated my shoulder. Yeah,
and had bad injury in your first game, and that was kind of a crazy season at Birmingham, wasn't it? In terms of managers coming in, was it Harry Redknapp who was there?
That's it. Yeah.
But by the end of the season, there'd been another 3 managers. Yeah. So it's like, you don't get injured, and maybe results go well, and you're playing a whole season and things go, and I'm not trying to make you sit here and wonder what if or anything like that, but it just, it is part and parcel of the game that these things happen. You crack into somebody, or somebody cracks into you, and all of a sudden, you're I mean, there's an association, I suppose, with your level and how you can perform and the kind of form that you can produce if you have these injuries as well, isn't there? That playing regularly is obviously, the best way to produce good football.
Yeah. I think, I always look at football these days, having been around it a long time, and have seen a lot of these kind of things, injuries, etc., for other players and stuff. Like, I always think football can change in an instant. There's not many jobs out there, but sport is one of them, where your whole trajectory of your career, any player, you can be the best thing since sliced bread, but you're one tackle away, you're one, whatever it may be, away from everything changing. So I always think, and like I said, I sit here grateful I'm still playing football, and I can still wake up and go and train every day. And but I think it's important to remember that, especially younger players who are coming through and maybe riding a high and riding a wave, everything's going great. Like, you can never take it for granted, because like I said, click of the fingers, it can all change.
Yeah.
And I've seen it a few times.
For sure. You played in, it feels like a long time ago, but you played under Unai Emery in his first season at the club. I think that was your last season at the club. How is that different from Arsenal under Arsene? It happens, at other clubs, doesn't it, where a manager who's been there for a long time, who's this incredible figure. We saw it with Manchester United. Alex Ferguson is another example where, they're sort of like foundational to the club. They are part of the foundations, and when they go, things get a bit wobbly. Was that something you were aware of in that first season under Unai Emery, or did it feel slightly fresh, slightly new? I mean, the season was going pretty well until the final few games. It looked like we were going to finish top 4, and then ultimately didn't. What was that experience like?
Yeah, I'd say a bit of both, really. I mean, it's obvious that he had huge shoes to fill, but at the same time, he did bring a real freshness to the club. Him and his coaching staff were they were very very thorough, very passionate, very, very likeable, good coaches, and he was a good manager. And he's proved that since, and he had proved it before. He's obviously a very good manager. And yeah, I don't know. I think it's difficult, isn't it, as well, for a foreign manager who maybe doesn't speak great English to come in and have to deal with everything, especially at a club of Arsenal's magnitude. Have to deal with players, have to deal with the media and everything else that comes with it. And maybe that was a challenge for him. You look at him now at Aston Villa, and it's, English is a lot more fluent, and it's almost like, it was probably difficult for him as well. But sure. I really enjoyed playing under him. I found him a very impressive manager, to be honest. How
did that work on a very basic level on the training ground, where his English is not as fluent maybe as it needed to be to do a job in that way, and that's not his fault, obviously. I think one of the things I always admired about Unai Emery was the fact that from the first day he arrived at the club, he made a conscious decision in all of his press conferences to speak English and to learn the language and to try and communicate with people in the language, where you see other managers and they have an interpreter for a few months or, maybe a bit more before they start to do it. But, is it an impediment sometimes on the training ground, or is that something that, I don't know if there's interpreters there, or, how does that work?
It wasn't a problem at Arsenal, in all honesty, because one, you had him and his English was good enough to get his point across. And with Unai, he was so energetic in the way he delivered his messages that he would often show you physically in terms of where he wanted you to run or his position he wanted you to get in. You probably remember seeing training clips or whatever. Like he was involved. He would literally demonstrate a lot of stuff, and so it wasn't a case of we ever felt like we didn't know what he wanted from us ever,
right?
At all. And also, you got to remember you have other coaches there as well, and if there's ever a moment where you're a bit unsure of something, you would have that conversation with one of his coaches who sits in with a meeting with him every day and knows exactly what he wants. So never really felt like that. I guess I was more referring to how hard it would have been for him as a manager to deal with other stuff. But in terms of getting his point across to us as players, it was never an issue at all. Yeah, I really enjoyed training under him as well. Like the training sessions were great, and his assistant, Carsey used to call him, he was great as well. There was just a real good set of coaching staff. So it was a good year. I mean, I was in a tricky position that year in terms of I was just coming back from my ACL and from my from my shoulder dislocation, these kind of things, and I needed to get some games. And obviously I think I'd looked to go out on loan in the summer, and in a pre-season game against Palace, their left back smashed me up in the air, and I rolled my ankle, and I was out for 2 months, and I was out for
they couldn't go anywhere.
So I come back, and I was desperate to obviously get some opportunities to play and to be involved, as any footballer is. And I played. It was difficult for me because I was so far down the pecking order. But when I look back, I was actually quite pleased with how I hang on in there, because mentally that was a very tough year.
Yeah.
But I got some games, and I think it was the Carabao Cup first, and done well, and then it was in the Europa League, and then it just sort of developed like that, and I got some games, and next year I went to Forest. So it was a difficult year, but I look back on that one with some pride, in the sense that I managed, because I don't think the expectation from the manager, he actually said that to me when he come through the door, because of how my last couple of years had gone. There was no expectation for me to play at all. So
going back in time again, what was your first impression of Mikel Arteta when he arrived at the club in August of 2011?
First impression, I remember first training session, I was like, oh, he can play. He was very tidy on the ball. Just, I guess what you would expect, really. Everyone knew him before from Everton, knew he was a good player, but just very tidy. Just he kept the ball moving. Just kept the game flowing. I'm thinking, he's decent. And then got to know him as a guy as well, and he was just different in the way that he saw the game, in the way that he could communicate with players, senior and the younger players. He was just the word is impressive. He was just very impressive man in the way he could deal with everything. Nothing ever flustered him. He would step up in moments, in the changing room when conversations need to be had, and he would have them, and the way he would deliver his messages, he would listen. He was just very good, very confident, but not in an arrogant way.
Sure.
In a way of, when he spoke, you listened. So, I mean, you probably spoke to and read quite a lot of ex-players saying the same thing about Mikel, but it was, especially as a younger player, I remember thinking, wow, like how impressive he is as a guy. It obviously hasn't been much of a surprise at all to see him go on to be the manager of Arsenal.
Those two guys, I think, and maybe you can speak a little bit more about maybe how they filled a void at that time in terms of experience, in terms of leadership. But, for those two guys to have come in after that game at Old Trafford, sort of right at the death of the transfer window, and you bring in Mikel Arteta, you bring in Mertesacker and the other players I mentioned already, but here we are 13 years later. Mikel Arteta is the manager, Mertesacker is the academy manager. The way I think, I've said it before, I think that those two guys, not just down to them, but they were quite fundamental in helping turn things back around and to steady the ship and to make Arsenal relatively competitive again, because we won FA Cups and we won trophies after 9 years. Like, could you see back then that this was in these guys because of the way they played, the way they trained, the way they communicated, the leadership roles that they took up as players? I know it's impossible to predict and say, I could see him being the manager, I could see Per being the academy manager, but is it any kind of a surprise to you that they're in the roles that they're in right now?
No, not at all. Not a surprise at all, Like I said about Mikel, I won't repeat myself, but and with Per, Germany international, just handled himself. He was the fine master. And had authority in his demeanour and the way that he was, but actually very likeable and very, even with people like myself and Chamber, the younger lads, we would get on really well with Per. Mikel was actually probably a bit different in that sense. Wouldn't have much to do with Mikel in that sense, like was stayed with the older boys, the more senior lads a bit more. But Per was one of them guys, he could get on with everyone. He was a very likeable guy, but also you knew like you didn't mess with Per either. So, and very intelligent as well. And you would need that to be in the role that he is. And I think fundamentally the way that he was brought up, probably in the German system, he knew, they can produce good young players. And I think what I like about Per, and I think he's great in that role, is that he will instill like. When I used to play Arsenal when I was a youngster, when I was 12, 13, they used to come to Sparrows Lane where I'd play at Charlton. They'd all have their Beats headphones on, and they would have such a swagger and like an arrogance, and there's a place for that, don't get me wrong, but to a certain level, right? But there was a real swagger about the Arsenal youth teams then. I actually don't know what it's like now, but my point is, like, Per always was someone who was like, keep your feet on the ground, work hard, be humble, have humility, all these kind of fundamental qualities to have to be a good person as well as a good player. And I can imagine Per, I haven't been back to the academy since, but I can imagine Per would be instilling a lot of them qualities into the younger players at Arsenal, which I think is very important, because I think in this day and age, because of what youngsters would maybe, or young players would see, certain footballers doing on Instagram with the, I don't know, the way
lifestyle and how you present yourself,
and I see, you can see it a little bit, and I think, when you're coming through an academy, like, that needs to be over there, like, leave that alone, focus on doing your job to the best of your ability and trying to get better every day. And I know for a fact Per would be so on that and instilling that the lads had them sort of qualities, which in turn makes a good footballer long term, and also it creates a good culture, which is very important for the whole team.
Yeah, I mean, I think he's been on record to say that, you know, the job that he has is to prepare these guys, you know, for the possibility of a career at Arsenal and a career in professional football, but also, you know, for a lot of academy players, you know, that doesn't happen. They don't get to play professional football. They've got to be prepared for that eventuality, I suppose.
Yeah. The stats of making it as a footballer are so slim, aren't they? At the end of the day. So, and yeah, hopefully that's something that's improving, because I think it is hugely important. Because if your sole focus is, I was lucky, my parents always made sure I'd done my education, and I followed that through right till the very end. Got an A-level in business studies, and there was always the what if. And yeah, it is very important, because if a youngster puts their whole heart and soul into becoming a footballer and it doesn't work out and they have nothing going alongside that, in the eventuality that it doesn't work out, which it doesn't for most, actually, then where do they go from there? Because that's a real big, for a dream to be shattered at 16, 17, 18, and then you have nothing and you have no idea, which oftentimes a lot of young players don't, because, and rightly or wrongly so, they chase their dream to the absolute max. But you need to have people around that who ensure that there is a plan B, there is a plan C, and they've got the tools to be able to go down them roads. Because otherwise you get to the end, and if you get to that point where you're released or whatever, and it can be a bad place for a young kid as well, someone who's not mentally mature and wouldn't know how to deal with that setback or that failure. It's not a nice thing for people to have to go through. But yeah, I'm sure at Arsenal, with someone like Per at the helm, a lot is done around that, and rightly so. Yeah.
Did you get many fines from Per?
A few. Not honestly, Andrew, not many. I was always...
You're a good lad.
I was a good lad, exactly that.
You mentioned your dad. I want to play you a clip, and I want to see if you remember this. So here's the clip.
Carl, it's just a quirky question. You know, when you look on the internet and do a bit of research, I looked about you and it suggests your dad was a professional singer. Is that right?
No, he wasn't. He wasn't a professional singer.
Yeah, his best song was "Come On, You Arsenal."
How good. So, what a great line from the boss.
It was, wasn't it amazing? That came about because I put a tweet up just as a joke. It's a little known fact that Carl Jenkinson's dad was the backing singer on Bonnie Tyler's Total Eclipse of the Heart.
No way.
So that guy obviously read that. You? Yeah, that was from me. Yeah.
That is fantastic.
So that guy obviously read that and thought, oh, I'll ask him about it. I swear that's one of the highlights of my life doing Arseblog and this podcast and this blog, is that when he asked you that question in the press conference, it was amazing.
That's hilarious, yeah. It's funny because I thought back to that moment the other day, because Arsenal done a post about me a few days ago, and one of the photos was me and Arsene sat in that press conference, and it reminded me of that question being asked, and the laughter that ensued. How funny.
What kind of a singer is your dad? Or is he not? No.
I actually don't think I've ever heard the man sing, actually, my dad. So yeah, it's just hilarious. But I remember being asked that, and my reaction, it says it all, doesn't it?
It does, rather. So what's next? You're back from Australia. What's the plan, or what do you see for your future? Are you going to stay involved in football as long as you can? Do you see a career in football, or what have you got in mind?
Yeah, so I'm going to play for as long as I can. I think I sort of touched on it earlier. It's the best job in the world, and I'm nowhere near ready to stop playing whilst I'm physically in a place where I can. I want to play for as long as I can. So that's what the next couple of years holds for me.
Have you got something lined up?
Yeah, I've got. Well, I say yeah. I've had some interest from a couple of clubs, but they haven't quite been what I see for myself, let's say, right now. So, time will tell with that. But I'm at a stage now where I think I want, wherever I go to, I want it to kind of, it's more, I think, about the environment than it is the level for me now. I want to go into a club where I actually really feel like I can make a difference. You know, speak about the senior players that I had growing up. You know, I'm now in them shoes. I've learned a lot along the way. I've got a lot to kind of pass on to I sort of had that role a little bit in Australia when I was there, you know, kind of helping the other younger boys come through, making right decisions, and, you know, sort of also just leading by example is how you behave and train every day yourself. But I want to go into a position where I feel like I can not only have an impact on the pitch, but off the pitch as well, in a sort of leadership role as well. So, yeah, I'm kind of just going to wait and see how that unfolds at the moment. It's a strange one because you don't know, at this moment in time, I don't quite know what's next. But just keep yourself fit every day, do the usual, which I love anyway. Is down the gym, doing some running, and that's kind of when you've been a footballer and you exercise every day, it's kind of, you don't feel right unless you're doing it. So yeah, it's just a summer, keeping myself ticking over, and yeah, we'll see what's next on that front. I'm also studying alongside, well, I have been for the last year. I'm studying with Setanta College, strength and conditioning. So yeah, where that leads me in the future, I'm not 100% sure right now, but I just want to have, you know, the qualifications to kind of decide when the time comes what sort of route I want to go down, whether that's into football, whether that's into another sport, whether that's into sort of training, perhaps young players on my own, like, you know, as a business. I don't know. But I think it's important to gear yourself up for when that moment comes, because it'll come around very quickly. I feel like it wasn't long ago that I was, you know, 19, 20, 21, and, you know, that's over 10 years ago now. 32. So it comes by very quickly. So just trying to prepare myself for that eventuality as well.
Time flies. It really does. Sure does. Final question. You know, obviously, Arsenal came very close this season. As an Arsenal fan, how hopeful are you that Mikel can continue the work that he's been doing and sort of get us over the line? And, you know, how much are you enjoying this version of Arsenal, and how competitive it is, and how hard they're pushing a team like Manchester City?
Yeah, I think that's the main thing that I look at and have enjoyed over the last couple of seasons, is actually how far we've come and how good we are and how enjoyable we are to watch as a team now. So much talent in that squad. A lot of it young talent that's only going to get better. So, yeah, of course, you always have the disappointment of not quite achieving what we wanted to achieve, but look, you probably got the gist. I try and look at things with a positive lens these days, and there's so much to be positive about Arsenal at the moment. I went to the last game, the team aside, I went to the last game of the season, and just the energy and the atmosphere in the stadium, like, it was just such an awesome thing to be a part of, and to see how together everyone is in the club and the fans as well. It was just a great, like, that was just a great day in terms of feeling that atmosphere. You know, obviously it didn't pan out the way that everyone wanted it to, but I don't know, from my perspective, there's so many things to be excited about and optimistic about as an Arsenal fan at the moment, and I do think success is on the horizon. I really do. So, and Mikel is clearly the man for this job, you know, with what he's done for us over the last couple of years. So good times at the moment, and hopefully they'll get even better.
All right, well, fingers crossed for that. I just want to say thank you for taking the time to talk to me this afternoon. I'm sure everyone will enjoy this. Best of luck with what comes next in your career, wherever that might be. Good luck with the studies, and hopefully we can keep in touch.
Yeah, nice one, Andrew. Nice talking to you.
Thank you very much indeed to Carl. What a great guy, and hope you enjoyed that conversation. And he did more than 70 times what any one of us would love to do even just once, and that is pull on the red and white of Arsenal and represent the club that we support. If you want to keep up with what happens next, you can follow him on Instagram. He is on Instagram. I don't think he's on Twitter, but he is on Instagram. It's Carl Jenkinson on there. And once again, thank you very much indeed to him. I mentioned that we would be doing stuff for the Euros, which we will will, of course, across everything, but we'll be bringing you almost daily, not necessarily always daily, but almost daily podcasts over on Patreon. So if you fancy getting on board with that, it's $6 a month. You can sign up, you get instant access to everything, and you can do it at patreon.com/Arseblog. That's patreon.com/Arseblog. Who knows what the weekend will bring? For now, take it easy, folks, and we will catch you on the next one. Until then, cheers. Bye-bye.